Hello and welcome back to the Measure Pod. I'm Dara, joined as always by my still relatively new but now established co-host Matthew. Hello, Matthew. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. It's nice to be established.
Yeah, I need to come up with new words. What's the word for co-host that isn't new but is also kind of new? Co-host? I need to buy a dictionary, really. Yeah, just
Just
call you
co-hosts
co-host.
will
Yeah.
do.
Oh, I didn't think of that. That's nice and simple. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got some news that we're going to go through, and then we're going to switch over to a really interesting conversation that we've had with a guest this week. So to the news first. Um, bit of a, I don't know, bit of a like not particularly related to what we do as such, but I just thought it was kind of interesting about OpenAI buying Johnny Ive's company, which is called IO. How did he? Firstly, I have so many questions about this. He managed to get the name IO for a company, and that's probably why it was worth 6.5 billion. That's what
Just
OpenAI
bought it
paid
for
for
the
it,
domain.
just for the domain. Like, what is it? Is it io.io or is it just anyway? That's homework for our listeners. They can figure that out.
It's definitely interesting just how much, like, there isn't, it doesn't have anything, does it? Like, this company doesn't have it has rumors of some sort of AI product or
It's
some
got
AI
well,
device.
no, it's got well. Maybe this is a rumor as well, but apparently there's a prototype that Sam Altman has actually taken home and tried out. But that could be a
Yeah,
lie.
but yeah, exactly.
That could be as true as our news.
There's a Measure Lab prototype that I've taken home that's going to completely change the world. Is
Yeah,
that true or not?
I don't
And
know.
now is Measure Lab worth 6 billion?
Let's hope so.
Yeah, I think it just shows how much money is in. I mean, it's got Johnny Ive connected to it, I suppose. Which
Johnny Ive
is
and the
pretty.
name IO, and you put those two things together,
Yeah,
and
domain Johnny
yeah,
Ive AI
6.5 billion.
6 billion is
Yeah,
actually a bit of an undervaluation,
yeah,
I'd say.
yeah, probably, yeah. But it is an interesting. I do think they could be quite a powerful. I don't know if you watched it. There's a video. It's a little bit kind of
Yeah,
bromancy. They're like sat in this coffee shop having, a coffee and chatting about how they got to know each other and stuff.
waxing lyrical about San Francisco and what
Yeah,
it means.
yeah.
But yeah,
So obviously for marketing purposes, but it is interesting that like, their kind of premise or what they're saying, the reasoning behind this, which does make a lot of sense, is like we're using decades old technology. I mean, our actual laptops and phones aren't decades old, but the technology is decades old, and it's not really fit for purpose in terms of what AI is really capable of. So it's like we've got this like vastly expanding new technology, and we're trying to interface with it with these little weird boxes and that we carry around in our hands. So the idea being that they're coming up with something that's actually fit for purpose, but what that is, there's a lot of speculation
yeah.
that nobody knows for
I
sure.
mean, you've had a couple of shots at it, haven't we? In terms of what was it? The Humane AI pin
Yeah, that did well.
that is gone. I believe they're now bankrupt and gone. And then the Rabbit R1, which I was stupid enough to buy
Yeah, how's that working
pretty
out
much
for you?
instantly. I think I think it was 2 days before I realized it was crap. So if it is truly different, because the argument with both of those things was, well, like, could they not just been an app on a phone?
Mm.
Um, don't get me wrong, I'll probably buy it. Whatever it is, Johnny, I'll have it. Just let me know when it's out, and
Well,
I'll put my arm in a pocket.
one thing I don't know, I wouldn't read too much into this, but one of the and actually I don't even know if it was in the official press release or just in an article about it, but it said something. It had a quote saying about we want to see this world where if someone's got a subscription to ChatGPT, they get sent one of these things, or apparently it could be like a
Yeah,
family of things. So it could be like the Google Nest devices where you might need one in each room and one that follows you around like a drone or something. But that suggested to me that maybe you'll get this that they won't make the money off selling you the device itself, but they'll possibly make it in other ways through subscriptions and maybe harvesting your data and selling it to the highest bidder.
there's always been that sort of. We talked before about maybe doing a conspiracy theories in data episode. There's always been that conspiracy theory that eventually you'll just get, like you say, you'll just get given your smartphone, because what they're actually interested in is all the data and
Of course.
the consuming you're doing on it, and it's better you have a platform to consume on
Yeah.
than not. So yeah,
And
maybe
we'll all
maybe
be
the
going,
future is
wow,
that.
this is amazing. I can't believe they're just giving us
Yeah,
this really shiny piece of technology out of the kindness of their hearts.
I just had to. all I had to do was have Elon Musk inject a needle into my eye, and now I can buy underpants on the go.
Life goals complete. But yeah, we'll see. We'll see. I mean, this is an interesting headline, and obviously it is quite a they make quite a dynamic duo. I mean, they're like the you and I of AI and hardware design, really, aren't they? You know,
I did get that
they're
impression.
like
Yeah,
they're like a
pretty
poor
similar.
man's Matthew and Dara, really. But we'll see. We'll see what they can come up with. If they need our help, if they're listening and they need some advice or consultancy, they know where to find us. But yeah, let's watch this space. I think they're going to call it AI companions. So it's slightly, yeah, we'll see. Could be a little AI friend that follows us around, but yeah, we'll see what that actually turns into. Um, On to slightly more kind of like real, tangible news, but still on the AI front. Anthropic have released their latest versions of the Claude models. So they've got their, what's been kind of called their powerhouse, which is Opus 4, and then the Smart All Rounder, which is Sonnet 4. And they're doing well. It's funny with these, isn't it? Like, you'll know more about this than me, but like every model that gets released, they pick the like benchmarking site or standard or whatever that they do well in. So it's like every time Google's comes out, it's like, oh, the new Gemini Pro, it's top of this leaderboard. But then the new Claude models are apparently top of SWE bench verified, whatever that is.
Yeah, yeah. It's. I think at the minute, I think the Claude release was a few days after like 2.5 preview or whatever that of Gemini that Google released, and both of them were claiming to be the best coding models in the world. So they're just one after the other. So especially now, like you've had Google kind of have a drop the mic moment with VO3, which is another the big thing that came out, which is kind of still got me in a continuous state of wow and panic
with the
a little bit.
audio as well as, I mean, that's
The audio
mad.
and it's getting close to like how the hell can you tell what's real and what isn't real?
Maybe that's what this is.
Um,
Maybe for people watching this podcast, maybe we've been created in VO3. Although I think it
yeah, are
creates
we a
better.
prompt?
I don't know. I think it creates better. It creates better outputs. Maybe
Yeah,
we're on the low
yeah, a bit more
setting.
dynamic. Yeah, but so then like Google drops the mic instantly after that. Then it's Claude's like, oh well, Anthropic's like, well, we got Claude
We're
4,
actually the
Claude
best.
4 Opus.
Yeah.
So then you got to imagine there's going to be some OpenAI thing around the corner that's going to be. I think I saw the other day the technical officers starting to talk about ChatGPT 5, and they're starting to try and spread those rumors and get that mill mixing. So it's a race to the apocalypse.
Yeah.
And we've just got to enjoy it.
Yeah.
Inject what Daddy Musk tells us to inject, and
Yeah, and just
enjoy
buy
our
our
lives.
underpants and just carry on with life. Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you
Yeah.
played around with the new Claude versions?
Yeah, I have done. I do tend to flip from pillar to post with them. So whenever the new one is, I'll use it. I know there's been one of the guys in our team has been using sort of the refreshed version of Claude Code, which has got some nice sort of value adds in it, working a bit more closely with IDs and stuff. And he's finding that really useful in some of the tools and things we're building here at Measure Lab. So we played with it a bit, yeah. So I tend to flick back and forth between Google and Gemini now. Interestingly, Gemini and Claude.
Yeah, I think from what I read, it's that and what these models are doing particularly well at is it's in my head now. I'm going to say real programming. I shouldn't say that, but it's like for like kind of hardcore programming tasks. So I think that's what it's ranking highly for. And I think there is some evidence outside of just what they're claiming, because I think I read that GitHub are going to adopt it for their Copilot. So they're going to use, I guess it would be Opus rather than Sonnet that they'd use, but I guess that's a bit of a testimonial there.
Yeah, it's definitely. I mean, I still find all of them potentially struggle a little bit with data applications, but I think we might have said this on the conversation we're going to have today, that I'm not sure there's as much data engineering and analysis SQL type information out on the World Wide Web where all of these things have been trained compared to a lot of web development training data that they've probably been trained on. So potentially they're a little bit stronger on the web dev and the standard software engineering stuff compared to niche. I suppose you could call data engineering and analysis niche, but potentially less public.
Yeah, I think so. No,
Um,
that makes sense. Yeah.
yeah.
And then on to a couple of more. Feels like this news is
Anything
like,
not AI related?
yeah, yeah. No, I was going to say, I think
Okay.
there's like almost like an unintentional kind of hierarchy to this news. Just start maybe an inverse hierarchy. We started with the kind of least relevant to us, and then we're gradually moving towards the more kind of like granular stuff. So on a non AI, and I mean, even this stuff, like you can't read a release without the mention of AI, even if it doesn't really have anything specifically to do with AI. And why I'm saying that is because Google on the ad side and the tracking side have released some new features or new tools lately that came from I think it was called Google Marketing Live, which took place recently. But even in the like release notes about that, they're saying, we're releasing all this like AI powered. And it's like, well, hang on, is this actually AI powered, or are you just putting the word AI in there because it's such a buzzword? But a lot of the kind of more like ad specific, so a lot of the stuff you can do in Google Ads, they're introducing a lot of AI powered. So in terms of both creating your campaigns, but also optimizing them and all the rest of it, there is a lot of AI going into it. But there were a couple of things we wanted to mention, which aren't really AI related. But you've got the Google Ads Data Manager API, which is so the data manager itself is not news. I think that's been out for about a year, but the API is new. And that's currently in closed beta. So I don't know what the timescale is for that being available to everybody. But Data Manager is a platform that lets you kind of import, manage, and activate your first party data through with Google Ads. And then the API is obviously going to allow you to do that on a more kind of on a bigger scale. So it's a kind of watch this space on that one. It is, you can express your interest. There's a form that you can express your interest for the closed beta. But if it's anything like some of these
Yeah,
forms
there's
you
a
might
lot of
expect,
forms.
how long have we
Yeah,
been
Google.
waiting for, what is it? Agent space?
Yes, there's a
We're
few
waiting a while.
space. I think I put name down for the Meridian model way back when that
Oh
was.
yeah, that was a
It
while
just
ago.
yeah. I mean, I think you can get access to that now, but I think Google Forms is doing overtime. There seems to be about 500 of them that you can sign up to betas and testings.
I
But
think
yeah,
so.
no, it's definitely interesting. Really,
Yeah.
really, really sort of could be really powerful.
Yeah, and I guess it's a bit like, some of the like Cappy and, it's going to be a way for, as security and privacy becomes, well, it's just like this isn't new, but like, as it continues to be more and more of an issue, I think anything you can do to kind of improve what you're doing with first party data is a no brainer. And so then on a kind of similar vein, I guess, the gateway for some reason has become quite a popular term, but there's the Google Tag Gateway. Am I calling it the right thing? It is the Google Tag Gateway, isn't it? Which was called first party mode, which probably makes more sense. I actually probably prefer the old. The,
That does
you know,
does what
oh,
it says on the
we've
tin.
got a really great name. Let's change it to something that doesn't really make a lot of sense, like Google Tag Gateway. But Google are smarter than me, so they probably see some reason to make that change. But this is where you can, I guess, tell me if I'm saying this wrong, but basically lets you host the script on your own domain. So you're not, and you can do this either with or without server side GTM. So even, it doesn't matter, but you're basically pointing it to your own domain, as opposed to the Google domain. So you could use it with your own kind of setup.
Yeah. Yeah, you can host it on your own servers or on like Google's servers, and yeah, I've not delved into it a massive amount because this is all relatively new and newly announced. But there's similar things that you've been able to do with things like State, where you've been able to host these things and have it host it all in first party context and things like that. So
So yeah, again, a kind of first party theme to these Google updates. They're obviously putting a lot of attention into improving their users' ability to collect and use first-party data. So I think these two things, the tag gateway and the data manager API, are both two steps in that direction. Data management API, maybe we'll talk more about when we get access to it. But for now, I think it's just more a case of saying these things are out or coming out soon. So watch this space.
And I guess we can say that we can put the release notes that you're talking about, Dara, or the announcements in the show comments, so people can go and have a read through themselves.
Yeah, I could. Yeah, exactly. And I couldn't actually find too much information on the on the data manager API. There's the developer, the kind of Google developer docs around that, but I couldn't really find a huge amount of information, which I guess is not a surprise given it is quite new. So more will probably come out. But yeah, I'll include all the links to any release notes and developer documents for people to take a further look at. There is a reason why our first two news items were AI related, which I mean they often will be anyway because we're just swimming in AI news. But this is this episode is AI themed because we have a really interesting conversation with a guest, Anthony Mayfield, who's from Brilliant Noise, who's a really interesting and clever guy, and we have a quite a wide ranging conversation around AI, including a few kind of predictions about the future and thoughts about how companies are using AI at the moment and what it means for people.
One running theme was probably about how you can try and get more AI adoption in their company. So I think it's really interesting. Plus all the other stuff we talk about. So really enjoyed it.
All right, enjoy the conversation. Okay, a very warm welcome to Anthony Mayfield. Anthony, thank you for joining us on the Measure Pod and welcome.
Delighted to be here. Thanks very much for having me on, guys.
So we'll let you do a proper job of introducing yourself rather than me doing a really bad job of it. So in as much, you can go back as far as you like and you can go into as much detail as you like, but just give us and our listeners a bit of background leading up to what you're doing with Brilliant Noise today.
Brilliant Noise has been around for about 15 years, and there's been we've done a lot of different types of work around social media, influencers, generally in the marketing sphere. But the kind of common thread throughout it all has been this idea of digital transformation, of adapting organizations, and that means teams, and that means individuals, and individuals, that means minds. So adapting all of those things, all of those systems, really, to come up with new frames and new ways of looking at the world because of the tools and the systems that have been becoming available to us. And really, in the last 2-3 years, that has become all about artificial intelligence, and that's become the whole of digital transformation, I'd say, at the moment. And the reason for that is that especially since ChatGPT came into the world, it has dialed up the urgency of digital transformation. People have been trying to change organizations to take advantage of digital technology for a long time. I think during the pandemic and then some of the subsequent economic shocks of the last few years, that it may be kind of dialed down slightly for some organizations, but it's right at the top of the agenda again now because it's moving faster. AI, which is another of the many waves of digital, the digital revolution, perhaps. And I think many people say it's not an extraordinary thing to say. Many people say it's the biggest wave of all, and it certainly feels like that to me. It's both speeding things up, speeding up the urgency, and then also some of the programs famously, like I think many companies that engage in digital transformation, trying to change how they work to take advantage of data, of digital tools, the internet, whatever, they very often fail. Transformations generally fail, but hopefully they've made some progress before they fail. With artificial intelligence, some of the things that made things slow down or fail before have now been swept away. Essentially because artificial intelligence, generative AI, as we experience it in daily tools like ChatGPT and Gemini and Claude, generative AI is a very, very different technology. It's a technology which accelerates how we think for the first time. All other technologies that we've had, I would argue, and I think many others do argue, all the other technologies we've had from the abacus through to Google have been mind extensions. They're things that help us extend out how we think. So we've got cognitive limitations. We've got things we do well, things we can't do. And we use things like pen and paper and databases and all of these things to extend our minds. Generative AI is the first technology that actually speeds up how we think. It thinks with us. And that's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it as well is that it's conversational computing. I think that's a really good way of describing AI. If we didn't have the phrase artificial intelligence, which has been around for a long time, and it's freighted with meaning and all sorts of different understandings. The big change since ChatGPT came out is you can talk to computers and you can make things and change things and ask questions without having to understand code, without having to be able to do engineering. Those things are still great, they still help, but suddenly a lot more people can get their hands on this incredible amount of processing power and an incredible amount of data that's available to us. And that's going to change how we think.
So it's interesting because it is, you talk about things like even go back to, the abacus and the printing press and all these things. And in a way, it's like AI is just part of the broader technological revolution. But at the same time, you seem to be saying, and I think we would agree that it's a very significant wave due to the fact that it is, like you said, for the first time, it's actually, it's making it much, much, much more accessible to people who don't need to be technical at all. And then it's also actually speeding up the way we think. So it is significant, but would you say it is still part of this kind of broader technological revolution that we've been going through since, the dawn of the computer?
Well, I mean, it's this, it depends how you want to frame it, how you want to cut it off. You could say it's part of the same technological revolution that happened since we sowed crops in the ground. There's a lovely book by a systems thinker and complexity scientist called Claude. He was at the Open University, and he wrote a book called The Future is Digital. It's a very short book and very concise, but he talks about technological co-evolution. Basically, he says that culture and society and technologies evolve kind of twisted around each other like DNA. And the effect of a technology, so technology is invented and it makes things better, obviously, or creates more of something. But the side effect of it is that it creates complexity. And in order to deal with that complexity, you need to invent more technology. And so you kind of keep stepping up and up and up. And those waves of invention seem to have got closer and closer together, is one of the effects. So the first one is, as we say, you plant crops in the ground. Great. Now we don't have to be nomads and we've got more food than we know what to do with. But there are side effects. The side effects are that we suddenly have surplus and we can have specialization. And that means we need to start organizing ourselves. So we need technologies like writing to do accounts. And then we need a technology called cities, because it's just not convenient to have everyone spread out so much. So then we put everyone in cities and we need to invent things like, well, literally streets and bin collections. And then we need finance systems and we need communication. So, and then skipping to the other end of it, I mean, I think what's happening at the moment as part of the digital revolution, Krzyzewski would say that started in about 1990 with the web. The web was that information, the beginning of that information revolution. And the web created access to information, made it access to information almost free. Marginal cost of accessing information approaches zero. And that meant that everybody could publish lots of things, but then we couldn't find things. So we had to invent search, and then search kind of becomes too complicated and gets broken. And we've got all these digital tools that we've been using. I mean, I'm sort of 25, 30 years into my career, and PowerPoint and Word and things like that were just new on the scene when I started working. And 30 years on, those laughingly now called productivity tools have created all sorts of chaos and terrible like problems just filing and finding anything. And we have back-to-back meetings and 500 emails in an inbox. And so we've created complexity from this thing that was supposed to help us. And now there's AI, and that will help us manage that complexity, but also it will create more complexity, and we'll have to invent something else. So it's it is part of that digital revolution. Yeah. Rajewski says we're about halfway through that revolution, and AI is the thing that's pushing us through the next half.
Do you think that it's going to really put a test on how well we can adapt to technology? So to go back to your analogy, when humans are really good at just embracing new technology and ingratiating it into their daily lives and just running with it, and they become complacent with it extremely quickly. Like flushing the toilet is not a miraculous thing to me, but like you say, when you're designing cities and trying to get rid of all this stuff, it's absolutely crucial. But the pace with which technology is changing is, it feels like it is truly exponential at this moment in time. Do you think there's going to be a reckoning where we just cannot become complacent or keep up with or invent the new technologies to deal with the things that are, how rapidly things are changing?
I think the key to all of this is to the answering that, and there's so many different ways to answer it, is complexity. The answer is it's very complex, and some humans will be complacent, some will be incredibly vigilant, some societies will be vigilant, some companies will embrace it, some won't deal with it at all, and none of that's new. Like, so you can see that just like with the web revolution, we have lived through 2 or 3 mini technological revolutions in our lifetime, and that's really weird. So we got the web and thought that was the best thing ever, and then the mobile web, and then social media. It's interesting, the reckoning. I don't know if there'll be a reckoning. It's always felt faster. It's always felt impossible since the 16th century. 16th century, if you had 300, 400 books, A, you were rich, and B, you started writing a lot in your journal, and there are journals of people in England with libraries of 300 or 400 books saying that they have information overload. There's too much now that they can read. They're worrying about that. Then we know, it's almost, a trope really, but that Aristotle was worried about people learning to write, and so we're always worried about having too much. What we know so far is that we have always adapted, and that's because, not just because we as units change, but it's because our culture changes and we come up with new ways of behaving that accommodates those new technologies, but also that our brains kind of upgrade as well. We've basically got the same brains, more or less, as we had when language developed. It's not that long ago, still the same structure. When language emerged amongst humans, it hijacked the bits of the brain that were to do with the trigonometry and geometry. Because we developed brains that were really good at throwing objects to hit other moving objects, because that's how we were hunting, or our ancestors were hunting. And from that emerged language. But language, so that was in a way that was a technology, but that language emerged, and immediately that gave our brains, which use maps to make sense of the world. We make maps of meaning, sometimes geographical, but because we had language, now we could make maps in our head of things that didn't exist, like maths or politics or religion. We could do those things because we could invent labels. And so suddenly we've got this, the cognitive, the real first tech revolution is when somebody started talking, and that spread through the world. That was a massive viral hit. Humanity loved it, signed up in there tens of thousands.
So much so we just sit here and talk in millions of podcasts today to each other.
We love it. We love it. Love it. But as soon as we had language, we could think in abstract thoughts. So it wasn't that like suddenly we had evolved, but our technology had evolved, and the way that we used our hardware had evolved. And then it evolved again when we had writing. It evolved again when we had movable type. But when we had writing, suddenly we could think and read the thoughts of others, and that started us thinking in new ways. And so did printing, and so did the internet. So yeah, we probably will adapt. And Yeah, it's interesting that phrase though, a reckoning. Will there be a reckoning? That's a very. I think that's probably quite a Christian idea, because that's our intellectual heritage in Western Europe. We always think that there's a beginning and end to things, and we always think that there's a judgment day somehow.
I have a flair for the dramatic. That's just
Yeah, me too. Me too.
Just thinking on it,
Reckoning.
I wonder as well, like it with the, I don't know if this is any different to how it's ever been, but as the technology gets more and more complex, are the masses moving further and further away from understanding it? So rather than, maybe it won't even be a question of becoming complacent, maybe there'll be a point in time where people don't even need to know any of the technical reasons why this thing works. They won't even maybe know that they're interfacing with something. They'll just be living their life and things will just happen. And they might,
Yeah, I mean that seems like a credible scenario, doesn't it? Because I mean, we don't understand very much of the incredible technology systems that we live inside of. I mean, I understand quite a lot about generative AI, but there's a bit where it stops. Also, our brains are really good at glossing that over. We talk about generative AI hallucinating to, covering, and basically when it hallucinates, what it's doing is it's kind of covering over the cracks of things that it hasn't quite pulled together. It's called confabulation. And that's what we do as well. Like, it's only when you really think hard about something and try to explain it to someone that you begin to understand what you don't know. Because your brain doesn't want you to worry about that. I mean, you go mad if you had to try and understand everything.
confabulation is pretty much all I do. Bringing it,
That's a good word.
it's a brilliant word, yeah. Bringing it back a little bit, because you mentioned again around generative AI, and just to bring it back a little bit, that first question I asked you about whether this was just another wave in the broader kind of technological or information revolution. Part of the reason why I asked you that is because when Brilliant Noise pivoted, if that's the right way to put it, to kind of, or I guess maybe you doubled down on AI, and now Brilliant Noise is, you're purely working with companies, helping them to adopt AI. And from the outside, that might have looked, and maybe to you on the inside, maybe it felt like a very radical change. But based on what you've said, you could actually say that that's more just of an extension of what you were previously doing, or like an evolution of what you were previously doing. Um, I'm curious to know, did it feel like a very radical change, or did it just feel like the logical next step?
It did feel like a radical change. So there was a kind of through 2023 up to the ChatGPT came out in November 23, was it? Or I think so. So through that year, you'd seen things like Mid-Journey, and we'd seen things like GPT-2, and people making, well, the role players creating dungeons out of it, and people playing with writing. It was all, Jasper had come out, and that was kind of an interesting tool. So all through that time, we were like, kind of, this is going to be huge. And the reason that we thought that was not just because it's a cool tech, because at the time everyone was talking about Web3 and crypto, which in their own ways are cool technologies, but they didn't feel as transformative as this. And partly that was because of social media, because we'd been through that cycle with social media. And in fact, the previous company where a lot of the founders of Brilliant Noise worked, which is called iCrossing, when we were there, social media developed. And the reason that we knew and that we could follow through on that tech wave was that you could see something fundamental changing. And that was that the means of distribution, means of creation of content had changed completely. So that's amazing. And you could see the same with AI, like, oh, no, this isn't just, it's going to speed up copywriting. It's like, no, this is going to change everything, because it completely changes power and it changes economic production. And so it's going to be huge. So there was that feeling of it burgeoning. Now, in terms of it being a radical departure from Brilliant Noise, I guess like the architecture of thinking about it was all there, because we were thinking about digital change and working with brands on how they reorganize for it. But the sort of early 2023, early 24, after the launch of ChatGPT, we had an economic shock, as in like our business had to be restructured, and we had to shrink, and that meant that there was also an opportunity, which was like, well, we have to decide whether we continue or whether we, and if we do, then what are we doing? And I think it was just completely obvious. Well, we go all in on this. We work with the clients that we're working with to help them, but then we explore what it means to live and work with AI, and we become a living lab. Really, that's how we've thought of ourselves since then. We see what happens, and I guess there were like 2 or 3 out of the team were kind of committed experimenters, and everyone else was interested. And then over that year, there was just a lot of experimentation and sharing, and new methods of working and ways of working emerged. And since then, everybody has become quite in-depth users and practitioners with AI. They're not all AI consultants. We still run some marketing campaigns. So we have creative director, we have data analysts, we've got a client director. So we've got people in these roles still, but everybody has become AI version. AI first versions of that. It did feel radical. It felt really radical, and I think we had to have serious conversations with ourselves about being that committed to this, even at that stage. So yeah, it was radical then, and I think it still is for when we're talking to clients and we're helping them to start to embed working in a kind of AI first, or thinking about how AI beds into the way that they're working. It's very radical for them, because it feels like a big departure. There's this kind of, when you start working with AI a lot, you've probably experienced this yourself. So you kind of like, you start working with something like ChatGPT and you go, oh, that's cool. And then you make it work a little bit better, and you're like, and then you discover that you can make custom GPTs, and you're like, bloody hell, I can create my own versions of this. And then you realize that you can make custom GPTs talk to each other just within the same. You're like, oh my goodness. And then once you've gone past that, I've made really useful tools, you start to go, actually, I need to think about this whole process differently. I need to start thinking about, what data am I bringing in to this? Now I understand a bit about what makes it work better. What makes it work better is context, basically. So if I give it data, if I tell it to think in a certain way, if I introduce certain ideas to it, it produces me better results. Okay, so that means you step back and start thinking about all of the things that go into that. And very quickly, you start to challenge everything within the organization. As an example, people start with a very, very common place to start, and it's a good place to start anywhere. The important thing with AI literacy is to start practice, deliberate practice. Very commonly, it's like, how do I manage a meeting? How do I manage my emails? Those are very, very common tasks, because those are the two of the biggest complexities that our most recent tech revolutions landed us with. And then once you've organized a meeting, you start by going, okay, I'll use AI to pull my agenda together. Or actually, I could make this better by using AI to prepare pre-reads for people. Imagine that, pre-reads. Remember those? When we didn't have back-to-back meetings, we used to prepare for meetings. Yeah. And the other thing that we did with those meetings, because they were big investments of time, is we'd make notes from them, and we'd take those and look at those and do things, not just go to the next meeting. So you start making the meeting better, and then you go, hang on, why are we having this meeting at all? And you go, okay, so, the meeting's about decisions, obviously. Okay, well, these people don't need to be there. They can just watch the video. And then you start to realize, actually, while we're writing the notes with this transcript from the meeting, this transcript's really good. There's some really good ideas in there. That transcript's not the notes. That transcript's data about us having a conversation about something. We can use that to start planning. That conversation needs to go into the data that informs the actions that are coming out of this. You see what I mean? It spreads out.
So do you think the best thing a company can do to begin to adopt this stuff is to align that machinery and get their data in order? Because that's kind of a theme we've had to a certain extent over the past couple of weeks, where, recently with Next 25, Google's chucking AI features at BigQuery, for example, like Billio. There's about 20 new AI agents and this, that, and the other. And what struck us is it's all looks really cool, but if you haven't done your homework and your groundwork to get your data into a good shape, then there's risks involved with just aimlessly following one of these agents down a path. So do you think that, like you said, I mean, we were talking a little bit more about your day to day there, but just getting data in order and getting the internal machinery in order is a good place to start getting ready for
I
more
think
individuals?
I mean, it's fantastic if you can be doing that. I think that the place to start is how people think about it and is practicing it every day. That's the place to start. And the reason I say that is the enemy of like why transformations fail, many, many reasons. But let's for the sake of a pithy headline, let's say the reason the transformation fails is that very, very bright people understand the problems of the organization, understand how it could change, write a plan about what people should do, and then what they should do is do a word count, as it were, or a spiritual word count of how many times should comes into that. And then nobody bloody does it because they're just being right is like, it's not the way that you ever get any change or get anything done. The way that you get change is changing habits and behaviors and the rest of it. Now, if you go to an organization and say, we need to clean the data and it will allow us to run mass agents that think, A, nobody understands it and they don't care and they've still got their day jobs. B, they're scared of AI because there's all this narrative about it's going to make us all slaves to a machine or we're all going to be like work. So why would that work? If you can get everybody using AI and they get to the point through working upwards of of understanding a meeting as not as a meeting, which is like a bundle of stuff that we don't really question, but understanding it as something that is there to solve a problem, that there's some data attached to it and a process attached to it and an outcome will come out of it. And they start to think like that, then they start to go, actually, I need to organize the data better for that. And then instead of talking about data cleaning, for instance, like, data cleansing or, it sounds very technical and weird. Turns out, I mean, I'm not a data specialist, but it turns out when I was talking to a data analyst, we were just saying we were cleaning data for a client to help them put together an AI system. And she walked me through what they were doing. It's like, oh, right, you're fixing their spreadsheets. Yeah. So the spreadsheets are all designed like Word documents because no one's ever been trained in these bits of software that all these organizations run on. So they don't have proper headings. They're not organized into columns. They're written to look like a document, but they're not read, but a machine looks at it and it doesn't understand it. So, but if someone's been through the process where they want their data in a good order so they can get something done, then when you start talking about organizing data properly and all the rest of it, that will happen faster. So I'm arguing for a sort of a bottom up approach there, but both are true. You need to be fixing the data, but there's also some complexity to that. And it's not just a case of, okay, all the data we've got, we need to organize that and have a beautiful data architecture. And now it now should work. If you hear the word should anywhere along the line, alarm bells go off because it should work now, but it doesn't. Why is that? Because of those pesky humans. And you're like, well, sorry guys, but the humans are going to be involved for a long, long time. Yeah. You need to work out how a human brain, which is an amazing piece of hardware, works with this amazing piece of hardware you've got called AI or software, and work out a system for that, not just a kind of an architecture that would work if only humans would do as they're told. I'm sorry, I think I've gone off on an anti-machine rant, which was the last thing anyone was expecting.
No, it's interesting. I don't think anybody would argue with if you said to them, "There's this technology that will make your meetings more efficient and maybe even help you decide if you need those meetings in the first place, and it'll take notes and all the rest of it." And I think 10 out of 10 people would say, "Yes, sign me up for that." But in reality, there's that weird phenomenon where people say, I'm too busy to make myself less busy. So the stuff about the kind of like ground level, I completely get it. And I think if you can go into a company and you can show people these tools in action and maybe go through some use cases, but how do you encourage and is it just down to the individuals? Will it work in some companies and will it not in others because of the personalities or the people? Because it is weird. You'd think everybody would bite your hand off, but in reality, people don't. Some people will just stick with the familiar, even if it's painful and tedious, because that's what they know. Like even your example of people using spreadsheets wrong. So if they took the time, they'd realize that it's actually much more efficient, but they're just used to doing it the way that they've always done it. So
Well, if they took the time, or if the company had bothered to train them, or if anyone had bothered to train them ever, and not just say, "Are you all right with spreadsheets?" But it's amazing. We like that how tool centric we are, that we think we'll buy a bunch of tools and everything will be fine. And what happens is people muddle by, and there are workarounds. But so I think some companies and some people will always be laggards, because we have a spectrum of human behaviors and attitudes, and rightfully so, because that means that we're an interesting, diverse species that don't just roll over at the next flashy technology, that they're actually, we have to persuade some people to use it. Good. So in terms of getting people to use it, you find that it's not, you definitely can't tell them. You have to show and then tell, but showing is not enough. You have to get them hands on, and they have to use it, and they have to use it through deliberate practice. So there's a lot of evidence around how adults learn, and it's, unfortunately, many of us learned how to do training and write training things and things before this research was done. But we need repeated practice. We need spaced repetition over time. We need to be able to discuss the ideas with other people, and we need to be able to use or try out the skills and fail slightly sometimes at them. And that's what they call a pedagogy or a pedagogy. That's how you learn. And that means that you have to come up with a use case, as it were, for people that's persuasive enough for them to spend time every day working with it. And then as they do that, they develop a level of literacy. I think they develop also, there's some practical skills like prompting and things, but they also develop a feel for it. They have a felt sense, as learning designers call it, of, oh yeah, no, I get it. Yeah, no, this is how it works. And that's really hard. It's really hard for people to explain that to people. Nobody wants to be explained. I want some training means I want a session on Wednesday where I turn up for an hour, and I will come out of that hour an expert on the thing that I've previously knew nothing about, how it worked. My wife runs garden design courses, and it's a similar attitude for adults coming in there. It's like, I'm ready to be told how to garden design. You have to do it. You have to work. You adults forget that learning's, they forget, despite the fact that if they had children in the house who've done GCSEs and they've seen the pain of learning, so they forget that learning is work. It's hard work. And the reason that people resist is perfectly natural. It's what our brains are designed to do. Our brains consume a huge amount of energy, and they are designed not to expend energy unless they have to, because that's a survival technique. So in a world where you're bombarded with information and opportunities to learn new things, the brain rightfully goes, yeah, it's all a load of rubbish, until it senses that there's something valuable there, which is, so what we do to get people started, we call them, actually borrowed it from Casey Newton, the tech journalist, a couple of years ago. He said he had his AI vertigo moment. It's like, oh my, not just an aha moment, but oh my goodness, that works. That should work. And you need people to have a couple of those, because what happens when you are, until you're about 12, your brain is absolutely flooded with a bunch of hormones that mean that you remember everything. I don't know if they're hormones, actually, I'm not a biologist, but they're a load of chemicals that mean that you remember everything. After 12, that switches off. Doesn't mean you can't learn anything, but it means that system has to be activated. And generally, lovely phrase in neuroscientist Sussex, it's like, surprise is a superpower. If you're surprised by something, the brain goes, I think there's something here that I could use. I'll have some of that, please. And it floods the brain with hormones, which are lovely. We love them. I mean, you've watched a room full of people when they're actually learning. Everyone leans in. Everyone's like, oh, tell me more. You can feel it in the room. To get change in an organization, you've got to shock or surprise people into a positive state. And then how do you get change? Sort of going back to some other points in your question, that's down to leadership. A lot of it is down to leadership, because even if you have a bunch of bright people who are surprised and desperate to learn, unless they are given the space to learn, and unless it is a psychologically safe place to learn, that they're not afraid of screwing up or breaking the AI or ruining them, they won't learn. That's it's just, and so leaders need to provide clarity around what their plan is. They need to be clear about what they don't know and be able to say, look, we don't know how this is going to affect the organization, but these are the ways that we're going to find out. We're going to find out together. And we're going to run some experiments in safe places and try some stuff out. And don't worry, this stuff's safe. Go and try this out over here. And then you'll get people who are learning. If your failure is not an option, and we're not at home to Mr. Screw Up, then no one's gonna learn anything and change at all.
To take it away from, not take it away from an organization's responsibility, but to look at an individual's responsibility for a second. Like, there's a lot of noise, and there's a lot of listeners here now probably saying, like, how the hell can I possibly know where to focus my attention or to look or to concentrate or what thread to pull at, because of just the sheer amount of news and updates and things that are coming out. Have you got any sort of practical approaches to cutting through some of that noise, or just finding an area of focus? Because like you say, everyone needs to augment themselves and to be looking at this stuff and essentially adopting it into practice. And work can help point you at that in some ways, but there's a certain level of responsibility on the individual, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I think there is. It does operate at all those levels of team, individual, organization. So as an individual, deeply in your best interest to understand generative AI, not just as it's a skill and you want to have it as part of your job, because whatever you do, if you're doing it with your brain, it's going to help you do it faster and better. And there's, it's just hard to lose, I think, in that scenario. But so how you start and focus, that's a different challenge to cutting out the noise, which kind of goes back a bit to social media. But how you start, you can you can put some boundaries on how much you have to do and what you need to do. And they are this. I mean, I think Ethan Mollick, who is Wharton business school professor, he writes very eloquently about practical uses of AI. He wrote a book called Co-Intelligence, which is excellent. Recommend it to anyone. Very practical, very feet on the ground. But he says it takes about 10 hours of deliberate practice to get a sense of what's possible with a large language model. So with ChatGPT. So set yourself that task over 10 days, an hour a day, and find something to do with it. And it doesn't matter what it is. It could be planning a holiday. It could be organizing your email. It's low stakes. You don't expect anything from it. Just play, see if you can make it work better, see what's interesting. Everyone loves falling down a Google rabbit hole of researching something. Go and research something, knock yourself out. It's fun. But if you do it for about 10 hours, you'll begin to get a sense of how it works. Once you've got a sense of how it works, then the deliberate practice stops to being an issue, because you're just like, what will happen is you'll start going, oh yeah, I could use it for that. I could use it there. So it's that's, I think one of the analogies that we really like is, and a lot of people use ones like this, is that it's like learning a language or it's like learning an instrument. It takes deliberate practice. If you learn French 10 hours, then, or Spanish, I like learning Spanish, but if you go to Spain with 10 hours of Spanish, congratulations, you will be able to order drinks and say hello, and people will find you more polite than they did. And you might have a slightly better experience. You might even spot some things on the menu you wouldn't have known about otherwise. If you keep going for a few months, you'll be able to have a basic conversation with people in the cafe, and you might find out somewhere more interesting to go. Beyond that, you can start reading the local newspaper, and then you find out about the things that are going on in town that you wouldn't have known about. And maybe it's like, but so you don't expect to know everything straight away, but you will get payoffs at each stage of learning, and it gets easier and easier because it's so much fun, and it helps you to do what you want to do. So that's how to get started with it. The other thing to say is that in terms of managing the noise, it's like, turn it off. I mean, but this goes back to social media literacy. and how we use social media. I it was used to say with Twitter, and probably would still say about X if I wandered on there occasionally, that if you don't like it, then you don't not you can't have an opinion about what Twitter is like or what LinkedIn is like. You have to realize it's your feed. So if it's too noisy, mute some stuff or don't go there as much. That's the problem. Not that there's too much noise. There is so much noise in the world. So get some noise cancelling headphones. Decide what you're going to listen to. That's the way to cut down noise. And I think one thing that can help actually with the noise is something we often open workshops or keynotes with, is the old William Goldman quote from the book Adventures in the Screen Trade. He wrote about Hollywood in the 80s and how everyone was trying to picture film, and with absolute certainty, it's dangerous liaisons meets Star Wars. It's going to be a hit, and it's not any more in it, but nobody knows. And he always said was nobody knows anything. That was the thing you had to remember in Hollywood. Everyone's pitching, but nobody knows anything. And when you're looking at a feed of LinkedIn or Reddit or wherever you are, and people are saying stuff, just say to yourself, none of them know anything. Because none of us do. When it comes to generative AI, we do not know what the next few years look like. At the beginning of this year, there was a kind of, right in January, the people with the most money in AI, the venture capitalists and the big tech firms, knew exactly how AI was going to work. And they said, right, we're going to build a $9 trillion super cluster of things, and we're going to do this, and it's all taken care of now. And then 3 weeks later, everyone realized that on Christmas Day, DeepSeek had launched in China, and they had a completely different way to do it. All the narratives, all the predictions for 2025 about how large language models worked were off the table. So anybody who says anything about AI has to say it with some humility, in terms of, they have to say, I think they even everything I've said would cut everything I've said, by the way, listeners. Everything I've said comes with the two caveats. It's like, this seems to be the case for now. This seems to be how it works for now. Until we find better evidence, this is what seems to work. Even the large language models owners, I think Claude, Anthropic, have the most information and put the most investment into understanding how the model actually works in the moment. We know the principles, I'm not sure where they are now, but I think they're at about 5% understanding of how their own model works. So even they don't know anything. So, Geoffrey Hinton got the Nobel Prize, didn't he? An amazing computer scientist AI. He said 10 years ago that we wouldn't have any radiologists anymore, but radiologists are now using AI more than anyone else. Yet he didn't know, because he's a computer. All he's good is being a genius about how to make the thing. He doesn't actually understand how we use it. The people who invented IP, the people who Internet Protocol invented Tim Berners-Lee. Tim Berners-Lee is not a billionaire. He literally invented the thing and did not invent Amazon or Google or all of the ways that value was created later on. No, I mean, I wish he had. He's a lovely man. So nobody knows anything. That's the way to deal with noise. And the more confident someone is, the more confident I am, the more I'm probably talking out my mouth.
So, but as a company, then, do you that's quite a shift in your mindset. You basically have to accept that you have to invest in this, and you have to allow the people within your organization to increase their AI literacy. So you're going to invest time and money, and potentially build solutions either in-house or get people to build them for you. And 5 minutes later, those solutions could be redundant, and you have to build something else. And I'm not even sure if this is a question, because this is just the way it is, but it is quite a different, it's not like, oh, we'll build a website and maybe it won't be the best website ever, but we'll improve it in 5 years' time. It'll do the job for now. This is a bit different. It's like you might build something thinking it's going to change your business, and then one of the companies will just roll something out the week after you've launched it.
I think that this is why AI literacy, or actually understanding how to use it, is the best investment I think any of us can make at the moment at any of those levels. Because when you develop your understanding of what's happening and what's possible and what seems to be possible and what doesn't work and where things don't work, then as the new waves of innovation come through, you know what to do with them. You know, I've seen this from the Kevin Wheel, the chief product officer at OpenAI, was on Lenny's podcast a little while ago. It was a really good session, actually, a really good Q&A. But he's like, they and their million developers using their API that are bumping up against the limits of what the current models can do. And when they do, they're like, great, not because it doesn't work, but because this will probably be solved in a few months' time. So that's a good place to be. I remember when so in 2023 was it essentially building a custom chatbot, and we had to get an engineer to help us. We spent about £2,000 or £3,000 on building this thing that used the client's learning materials and answered questions about them. And then 3-4 months later, the GPT store came out, and we made 20 of those in a day for nothing. But we made it on the day they came out because we knew exactly what that feature was for. And amazingly, still many, many people haven't even opened the GPT feature, and then they're just using it like Google still.
So can you put a kind of slight tangent, but it is following on from that a little bit. So so as a business, you've got to understand enough. You do have to accept that the technology is going to change. Almost as quickly as as quickly as you learn one bit, it's going to change, and you're going to have to adapt to the next bit. Does that mean then that so like a question we often get asked when we're kind of working in the the marketing analytics space, you often get asked, like, can you put an ROI on analytics? And it's a tricky question to answer, and various people have different answers. Some people think you can, some people think you can't. What's your view on AI? So if you're that's the first question the business owner is going to ask, isn't it? It's like, can we prove an ROI on this? If we invest in AI, how do we know it's delivering? How do we measure the success of it?
Such an interesting question. I mean, it's obvious. It's an obvious question, but it's so interesting when you try to unwrap that. And actually, that question can mean very different things in different settings. Sometimes I've found where a leadership team or a leader has gained even a basic level of AI literacy, they gain an instinct that, oh my God, this is going to be huge. We need to get in there, and we need to start moving fast. And what's the ROI going to be on this? Can we measure it? And what they're saying is an honest, straightforward, let's measure this as we go. Let's make sure that we're measuring it. Great. Then there's another way of asking it. And that's like, what's the ROI going to be on it? And that is, I don't want to do it. Like, you tell me exactly how this is going to work. Now, I don't know if I mentioned how uncertain and how weirdly, blah, blah, blah. Yes, there's a leap of faith. You can wait. You can wait until there are case studies and definite ROIs. Another way that I've countered that question, and I hope not too aggressively, but is like, okay, so we're working on your right, we're going to work on your sales team's efficiency in how quickly they get through sales. So we could measure the uplift in sales, sure. But you want to know about the efficiency, about how much more quickly they're producing sales documents. Okay, great. And you want to know what their productivity levels, what return on investment we need. How do you measure their productivity levels at the moment? Well, no one does. So meetings, this meeting software, what's the ROI on that? Well, how do you measure the effectiveness? Oh, you don't, do you? You don't measure anything to do with that. You just go to meetings like the rest of it. So there's those kind of aspects to it. The other thing, though, I've found is that the ROI conversation can be bound into, depending on people's fields, a model of ROI that can be quite reductive. So, for instance, in marketing and performance marketing, what's the ROI on this? I.e., is it going to improve? Is it going to give me a sales uplift? Is it going to improve awareness? Whatever. If you take a different tack, and ChatGPT is really good at this, actually. If you stop thinking of it as a marketer or as a thing and go, okay, tell me how Sequoia Investment would put together the return on investment case on this. Tell me how McKinsey would put the investment case on this if it was wanting to invest, you said, £10 million into this. And you will see stimulated versions of those different ways of thinking about ROI. And it turns out that it will be things like share price uplift. It'll be, the effect on staff turnover. It'll be competitive. Suddenly what ROI is can be things that that use business cases that people use to invest millions of pounds. You know, so you can actually broaden out your ROI. I remember with one company, I was looking before we started working with them. And I think in the end, what we looked at was quite straightforward productivity measures and just building business case studies around the innovations they came up with. But I was looking at their reporting and trying to see how they were measuring things at the moment. One thing that came up was like the scope 3 environmental impact. So they measure, is it scope 3 or is it schedule? Yeah, I think it's scope 3. So a lot of companies that are signed up to this will measure what their carbon impact is. And one of the ways that they reduce that, especially if they're not actually manufacturing things, will be not having as many meetings, not going to the office, not cutting down business travel, things like that. Well, that's a carbon business case. That's a carbon ROI that you can put on. I've killed 10 meetings this week because I've realized that with AI, what we can do is actually make those decisions, inform those people, and have like 1 hour meeting where people are having a nice chat and catching up and bonding instead of a 7-hour meeting where everybody's walking through PowerPoints that have nothing to do with reality.
So one area that we haven't really gone into much, Anthony, so far is around ethics. So, you know, if you've got a company, they've got enthusiastic people, they're improving their literacy. I know this is a very big, broad question, but how should a company or even the individuals approach the kind of ethical side of how they're using AI? And, you know, as you're building that literacy, how do you, in parallel, kind of maybe build your awareness of things like bias or any kind of privacy concerns around using these tools? Is there any kind of tips you would give people or any advice around making sure that it's used ethically?
I mean, one thing we definitely do. So when we run, we'll sometimes run like kind of an onboarding workshop series of, 2 or 3 workshops in a row for a team to get them started. We make ethics or we make values certainly part of day one. So that day starts with prompting. And the reason we start with prompting is it's a good way to shock people by showing them what a difference a different approach can make to something. And that leads them into kind of being interested in the rest of it. But we usually end that first day by taking, if the company has a set of values that is meaningful to them or a set of principles or something, we take those and we get people to talk about what they might mean in the context of AI. And the reason I say that is that's the place where suddenly at the end of the day, a lot of the anxieties and questions and uncertainties from an ethical point of view come into play. People will talk there about, is this job replacement? What's this going to do to? What about the environmental impact of using things? What about are they taking our data? All of those sorts of things. So you need to get all of those out on the table and deal with them as part of putting in as a kind of an organizational policy level. You need a policy around these things. If you have ethics, then you're going to want to ask, what do they mean in the context of AI, and what are these things? What questions do we need to ask? And that's a good place to start. One sort of slight tangent from, or it's a slightly cool tangent from that is one of our clients that we work with, deeply committed to their values and their cultures all over the walls. They've got books that everyone gets. They insisted we read it when we started working with them. Right. Cool. So we turned that book into a chatbot and had it talk to people in the meeting. So that chatbot was talking through the frame as if everything that was said in that book was gospel truth. It was fun. But I'd read a thing in the Harvard Business Review about dilemmas and about the real test of a value, ambition. That's great. Kindness. Okay. But if I come across a situation where there are 2 options and maybe both are equally backed up by data and argument, but they're different. That's life. You come across dilemmas and you have to make a choice. Then which way does the value guide you? That's what a good value or a good principle is, and that's a good guide for ethics. So I was reading that and I thought, well, let's put in some dilemmas for it. And this company we happen to be in the marketing services space, so I picked some recent crises in the marketing space, like Havas and Just Stop Oil, or working with a celebrity who turns out to be very right wing. What do you do? And I said, okay, imagine you're on the board of this company. What happens when staff start protesting? Oh, well, we have to lose that client because we're people first. Okay, right, fine. We've lost that client. And now we need to lay off the team because we don't have as much revenue. Oh, right. Okay, well, what we might need to do then is consider our other things and start qualifying it in this way. And I thought it was very interesting to probably what people don't do, but is to actually imagine having your values as an AI on your board. It would be really awkward. I'll tell you for one thing, out of my limited experiments, everybody's values are a lot more woke than the way that those companies actually behave. You'd think they were all charities if you just read the value propositions. I think ethics are really important. We're going to bring them in. I also think there are really interesting things you can do with AI to bring ethics and values to life and see what you actually mean by them.
Okay. Thank you again, Antony. I think that's a really good place to stop. I think we probably could all keep going for several more hours, but we've probably all got places to be. So I think we can leave it there, but maybe leave the door open for a return visit one day to see how much of what we've talked about. We can put you to the test when you said earlier, don't trust anyone who claims to know what they're talking about. We can see in 6 months or 12 months time where things actually are. But for now, let's leave it there. And thank you again for taking the time to talk to us. That's it for this week's episode of the Measure Pod. We hope you enjoyed it and picked up something useful along the way. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on so you don't miss future episodes.
And if you're enjoying the show, we'd really appreciate it if you left us a quick review. It really helps more people discover the pod and keeps us motivated to bring back more. So thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.